And when she says, hey, you just make it happen, is all. So I'm just going to be here for support. And another reason is because she said she wanted me right here. So I said, okay. There you go. You want it up closer? You can't get no closer than that. You can find her.
Okay.
She on? Okay.
So when Casey first asked me to give my testimony, of course, my first response was, no, I'm not on.
Turn what? Her mic? Let me see it. We got something now.
Okay. Now okay, good. All right. So when Casey first asked me to give my testimony, of course, my first response was, okay. Absolutely not. I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. Nobody wants to hear it. But what he didn't know was that God had already been talking to me about this for about a week or so. And of course, I was telling God the same thing. No, I don't want to do this. No. But God just kept telling me they need a voice too. They need a voice. They meaning the family of an addict. We've already heard 2 testimonies of addicts, and we applaud, their bravery to come and to share their story, and we appreciate it. But the whole time that they were up here, my heart kept going out to the family and what the family went through. So I told God, okay, if somebody says something to me about giving my testimony, then fine, I will. And of course, a couple days later, Casey came and asked me, and so I'm stuck. So here I am. But one of the struggles that I had deciding to tell my story in a mixed setting like this, where there are addicts of all various stages, whether you're just about to fall over into addiction, you are right in the middle of addiction, or you are crawling out of it, or maybe you're on the other side. And then you have the people who don't really have much to do with addiction. You don't even really know what's going on with it. And then you have the family. So you've got this whole mixed setting. What can you say? Because my intent is not to offend or drag the addicts back to a dark place. That is not my intent. But I have to tell my story. And ultimately, that's just part of recovery, is being able to go there and know what you have done. You have to face the fallout, and so I have to speak the truth in this and know that the truth is not the problem. The problem is the problem. The truth will be your answer. So I have to be able to share that dark and painful part of my story, and I can't sugarcoat that. One thing that I do want to talk about real quick is if you're not familiar with addicts or the family of addicts, just to kind of give you just a little introduction as to how that kind of works. One thing is during the addict's addiction, they get that high. They get that thrill of the chase. They get that satisfaction, the numbness, whatever it is they're looking for, they get that. Family doesn't get that. They get drug along on this path with you with none of the benefits. We don't want to be there, but because we love you, we're walking that journey with you. We spend a lot of our time revolving around the addict. The addict becomes the focus of the family's efforts, their energies, their emotions, and we adjust ourselves and our roles in the family to help you. And that's the way it should be. I mean, if you think about it, when something invades your physical body, what does your body do to it? You run a fever, it sends cells to attack that foreign object. It's sending all sorts of warnings to you. Well, that's sort of the way a family works. When that person gets sick, becomes addicted, the family, comes together and we work real hard to get you out of that. And that's fine, that's normal, that's healthy. The problem comes in when that wounded member is not getting help, whether they don't want to get the help, whether they can't get the help, but then the family is constantly revolving around that one individual. We're dancing around you, we're adjusting ourselves for you, and it's just not working. And then the family just kind of gets stuck in that destructive cycle of that pattern where we just revolve around you. So that's when the family becomes dysfunctional and we just get stuck in that broken position. So
I'm real mixed up now with that paper.
You don't have to be.
Okay.
This is my paper, I got it under control.
All right.
So, okay. Now, we'll go from here. Growing up, I don't ever really remember my family not struggling with addiction. My dad was and still is an alcoholic. He's on the wagon, off the wagon, on the wagon, off the wagon. And he's your typical addict. An addict usually has an addictive personality, and it's not just one thing they're addicted to. They're usually addicted to many things. You know, if they come off alcohol, they're going to replace it with something else. And that's the way my dad was. I am second to the oldest of 5 kids. We did go to church all the time in my younger years. All the while my dad was drinking, he would go to church drunk. We saw it as kids. We didn't understand why, if we know he's going to church drunk, singing in the choir, doing the Awanas program, going on visitation, how can the people of the church not see this and do something? And in fact, my mom did go to the deacons, pastors, elders of that church and reached out for help. This is our situation. This is what's going on. We need help. There was nothing. Maybe one man made a phone call, and that was it. That was all that came of that situation. So that was a hard pill to swallow, that, you know, we reached out to the church just like we were supposed to, but nothing happened. Well, as with any untreated addiction, things just progressively got worse. Like I said, he was addicted to many things, and one was spending money. So he spent money like we had it, but it was just like water to him, no big deal. And he spent so much money that my mom had to get 2 different jobs just to make ends meet. She was a science teacher during the day, and at night she worked at the local hospital. She was a blood bank supervisor. So that kept her gone during the day, in the evenings, and into the night. So we were left alone with Daddy most of the time. My older sister and I pretty much took over all the household responsibilities. You know, we cooked, we cleaned, we helped with the younger siblings, homework, bath time, you know, we did it all because we never knew how Daddy would be when he came home. Occasionally, he might be sober. That's a good day. Mostly not. That's not what happened. You know, he might be the sloppy drunk coming in. He might be the angry drunk, the violent drunk, the weepy drunk. You just didn't know. You didn't know who was about to walk in that door. Sometimes the police would bring him home from passing out in the neighbor's yard. Got out of his truck, fell out in the yard, passed out. They'd bring him home. Sometimes he would just spend the night, the evening, in his truck, in our driveway, throwing up. We just left him there. He would either come in later, or Mom would bring him in, or that's just where he stayed. We just had to keep going on. Something I read the other day really summed up life with an alcoholic parent, or a parent that is an addict. Nothing is the way it's supposed to be in an alcoholic family. Dates are canceled, lies are told, relationships alternate between close and warm to cold and distant. Children vacillate between having no power at all to having way too much power as the adults fall in and out of normal functioning. And that pretty much sums it up. That's just, it's chaos. So, I am what is termed as an adult child of an alcoholic. Maybe you heard of it, maybe you haven't. It's a whole thing. There's books, there's seminars, there's, you know, you name it, there's articles, there's groups. They all describe us. So adult children of alcoholics, or addicts probably, tend to develop similar personality traits. Some of these would include high levels of anxiety. We become isolated or learn to disassociate. We are rigidly self-sufficient. We tend to either become addicts ourselves or marry them. We have abandonment issues. We can have incredible radar when it comes to picking up on the emotion of a room when we walk in, yet we won't trust that radar to be telling us the truth. We can become more concerned with others rather than ourselves. We may have guilt for standing up for ourselves. We don't seem to get that we can set up our own personal boundaries, or we may set up the wrong boundaries. We're going to keep out the people that we need to let in. We're going to let in the people we need to keep out. Let's see, we can confuse love and pity. We tend to love people that we can pity and rescue. Relationships are incredibly hard for us. They scare us. Sometimes they feel like this nasty trick that somebody's trying to pull on us. We tend to stuff our feelings because in the past, they hurt too much. They're not safe. You don't rock the boat in an addict's home. You just don't. It's safer to stay in the background, go to your room, just be absent is what it's safer to be. Let's see, there's a loss of trust and faith. Relationships that were supposed to be the safest are the least safe. The people that you're supposed to be able to depend on, they are the least dependable. The one who is supposed to protect you is the one who's causing all the pain. So you can see where, you know, a lot of the confusion and chaos comes in. We become experts at building walls around our hearts and shutting people out. We avoid conflict, yet but yet seem to find ourselves in the midst of it anyway, or we become very good at pretending the problems just don't exist. They're just not there. And here, the last two are really what nails me every time. We always feel different from everybody else. We feel like we're on the outside looking in, like we are less than. We're also very good at appearing a certain way. We can be empty and disconnected on the inside, yet we appear very full and like we have it all together on the outside. You would never know that. And then the last one, I think, is probably the biggest, but we develop a deep, deep sense of shame about ourselves. We automatically assume that people see us as less than. We just do. Now, a lot of the feeling different and that overwhelming sense of shame we take on ourselves. It's all in our head. However, some of this can be contributed to by others. And here's a story that speaks to that. My sister was around 10 years old, and she was invited to a birthday party. We had known this family for a long time. We went to church with them, school with them. Like I said, fellow church member. I think this man was a deacon in the church. Could have been one of the deacons my mom went to speak with. But the mother, for some reason, took it upon herself to pull my 10-year-old sister aside and proceeded to tell her that I really didn't even want to invite you to this party. The only reason you're here is because my daughter wants you here. And the reason I don't want you here is because of your family. Like it could rub off on her or something. Maybe she thought she was going to be a behavior problem or whatever. But then my sister walks around with that for the rest of the night, for the rest of her life, basically. She walks around feeling less than. So that just kind of adds to that whole feeling of not ever being good enough. So as I became a teenager, we changed churches. And this is where I met Casey. We had a friend that went to this church, and he invited me and my older sister to come to youth group that night. So we went in, typical youth group setting. He sat down, my sister sat down, I sat down. There's an empty chair beside me. So we're sitting here talking, and suddenly I hear, before I see, this person jumping over the row of chairs into the chair next to me. He's bumping all into me, and just out of the corner of my eye, I'm like, what is going on? He then proceeds to, spitballs and rubber bands and hollering at people and insults, and I was horrified. I did not know what's going on. So I'm trying to move the chair over towards my sister. That's not working. He's still just going crazy. Dylan, he's like you on crack, basically. This is not a Dylan roast, but that is just, if you know Dylan, that's the way it is, plus. So, and of course.
Look what you turn into.
I even begged my sister, please just trade places with me, but she's the older one. There's a pecking order that is not going to happen. So I am stuck sitting next to, guess who?
That's not how I saw it.
Okay, well, do you even remember that?
I remember you looking at me saying, get up here and sit down.
Okay, that's. So anyway, my parents pretty much quit going to church at that time, but my sister and I, we kept going. We became very involved in our youth group. That became like our little safe haven. At one time, we even went to our youth pastor with our problems at home. And he gave us advice to just go and talk to our dad about this. Tell him how you are feeling. That was very well-meaning advice. I don't think he had much experience with an addict and how manipulative they can be and how they can put their stuff off onto you. We did. We sat our dad down and we told him everything. This is how we're feeling. This is how it makes us feel. We don't like riding around in the car with you when you're drunk. We don't like all this stuff. We don't like you coming home in all these different situations. His response, and if you have dealings with an addict, you probably know what his response was. Very typical. He told us that if we were better daughters and if we would love him more, he could get over this. Okay, so we all know that's impossible. That you cannot put that off on a teenager, on a child. But that just further enforced that whole there's something wrong with me mentality. I vividly remember praying a lot for God just to step in and make this stop. This is painful. This is dangerous. It can be violent. I just wanted to feel normal and not live in all that darkness and chaos and pain. And I didn't think that was an impossible thing to ask of him. He could do it. He had all the power. I had trusted in that and knew he could do that. So kept praying, nothing happened. So I thought, well, okay, maybe if I go to the altar and pray, that will make it even better. So I specifically remember one Sunday, we went down to the altar at our church, and I begged God, stop this, make this stop. There was somebody that went down to that altar with me, and it was Satan. He was whispering in my ear the entire time. Nobody's going to help you. Your mom has already been to a church, asked them for help, and they did nothing. You're on your own with all of this. There's no knight in shining armor. Nobody cares. You're going to have to do this on your own. And you know what? God's not even going to help you. And there was enough truth in what he told me that I bought into every bit of that. So I remember getting up and saying, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to ask for that anymore. I'm shutting these emotions down. That's it. And I think at that time, we talked about hope. I think that's when he kind of just reached in and took that hope away from me. And I let it go. I learned how to really build great walls around my heart. Higher, thicker, nobody's getting in. I pushed people away, kept them out. I stopped trusting authority, stopped trusting men in general. But mostly, I stopped trusting God at that point. I was a Christian. I am a Christian. I trusted him for my salvation. However, I did not trust him to take care of me on a daily basis. I just didn't see that. John 10:10 says that the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, and that's exactly what Satan had done. Satan doesn't play fair. He's not going to look at you and say, you know what, this happened to you in your childhood. I'm not going to go there. Out of the kindness of my heart, I'm going to leave that little part of you alone. That's where he's heading first, right there, because he knows that childhood wounds, they run so deep. They run so deep. Those are probably his specialty, honestly. And those wounds can appear invisible to others, and they might even appear invisible to yourself. They shape who you become as an adult. And you know what? Satan's going to take full advantage of that every single time. He's going to exploit them in every single way that he possibly can, right on through to adulthood. We talked about hope. Hope is such a powerful word. It's what Christ brought us, hope. But if we feel we have lost that, it can just have devastating consequences. Proverbs 13:12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. So Casey and I dated off and on and eventually got married at the age of 22. And I had determined early on, I am not going to marry an alcoholic. I don't care what happens, I will not marry an alcoholic. And I didn't. However, unknowingly, I married an addict. Not only was now I I was an adult child of an alcoholic, I was now the spouse of an addict. Let's see here.
Just one step in.
You can. Go for it.
Something that I didn't realize is my addiction. I never thought that it would take over like it did, and it was quick. And so I would think, okay, I could get a hold of it, and sometimes I did, and then other times I was all out of control. And so I came home from, it was after work one day, came home, and she met me at the door, and she said, it stops today. Here's your choices. You can go get help, or you can get out, but you're not going to be here. Or I'm leaving, we're leaving, but we're done. It ends today. And so this is the part where it taught me, and I'm going to contribute it to my mother and father. I feel like they instilled this in me. If I'm the problem, then I don't need her calling for me to find me somewhere to go. Does that make sense? I think if I'm the problem, I need to be on the phone finding somewhere for me to go. And so I called David's grandfather, and told him the whole situation, and he said, "You come on up." And we was there about a week, and of course rehabbing and so on and so forth, and so really the first time in my life, David's grandfather, Nolan Jackson Sr., taught me the Bible. I've been in church all my life, isn't that right? There was things he taught us that I had no idea the Bible said. I'm humbled that many of you come to me sometime and say that I teach you the Bible and things you've never heard and this, that, and other. I contributed to that man. I mean, he taught me things. I'm just like, what? You know, and so I just thank God for him. Obviously got help. We talked to our oldest girls last night. They know nothing about this until last night. I don't go around and talk about it. It's way back there. They were very, very young, very young. I don't even know if Mariah was born, but I remember these words. She said she had called my old youth pastor, and which at that time just meant the world to me. I mean, I didn't want to let him down. And she called him and she said, I don't know what else to do. This is where he's at. And he said, tell him to call me. Well, when I got home, she confronted me, said, he knows you need to call him. And I exploded. Now, I ain't never hit her or anything like that, but I tore something up, man. I was so mad that he now knows that I'm an addict. And she said these words. She said, wait a minute. You mean to tell me you're more worried about him and he's never died for you? And he's got this kind of power over you and Christ don't? And it just gut-shotted me. And she said, he'll never call you. And he said, it'll be a while, but he'll call me. And sure enough, it was a week or so, and I called him. And of course, I had already made plans with Dave's grandfather, Nolan Jackson Sr., and so on and so forth. Well, long story short, just so you know, and she's going to get in this, I'm not going to steal the thunder here, but just so you know, I'm not a psychic or anything like that, but an addict, all of them have the same characteristics. Would you agree? Mm-hmm. All of them. I mean, selfishness, self-centered, it's all about them. The big thing about an addict is they can't control themselves, so they're going to control you. Would you agree? So always remember that. If you're in an addict's home, more than likely that's what, especially if they're a parent. They're a parent. They're out of control, but they're going to make sure they control everything you do and so on and so forth. And I'm not talking about, there's well-being there, and I understand that, but I'm talking about just putting rules on you that Jesus can't even live by. You know what I mean? Seems like. So anyway, got help. Our marriage became healthy. I started realizing through Scripture what it's supposed to be as a spiritual leader, and yet there were still battles with her, because you have to understand there was times I would give her the spiritual leader role, and then there's times I want to take it back, and I'd give it to her and I'd take it back, and I'd give it to her and I'd take it back. So now that I'm taking it and I'm going with it, now she's having a hard time. Like, how far is this going to go before you give it back? And thank God it's not ended up that way. So she has her position, I have my position, and there we are. So is that good? Mm-hmm. All right.
Earlier I read a whole list of character traits of maybe an adult child of an addict in general. And a lot of those are looked at as being more of a negative kind of thing. This is what develops because you've been treated that way. But I think God was able to use a lot of those learned behaviors that I had to get us through that time. Those walls that I built and being able to guard my heart, those were not bad things at this time. I had to emotionally remove myself from that situation. So I was able to disconnect myself on that emotional level and not really look at him as my husband, but simply as a brother in Christ who desperately needed help. And then I could give him my support, my prayers, and that sort of thing. So that's one area I think God took that negative and turned it into something positive. And that's biblical. He tells us that he can do that, and he will do that. One of the main struggles I think that I had to work on, and still probably to this day struggle with, maybe on a daily basis, was the whole trust in God issue. The hardest pill for me to swallow was the fact that he knew I was in that position, and he chose to leave me in that position. Even as a child, when I begged him to remove me from that, he left me in there. And I could not understand that. And then to go on and allow me to marry, these were choices I made, but this is how we rationalize things. To marry somebody, you knew what was coming down the road for me, and you still sent me down that path. And for so much of the time, he just remained so silent. just silent. I just wanted to hear something, anything. And I ran across a poem that is supposedly, on the internet, who knows, but supposedly it's a poem of belief by a Jewish prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp. And when I read this poem, it was just like, okay, that makes sense. But this is what it says. It says, I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. And I believe in love even when there's no one there. And I believe in God even when he is silent. I believe through any trial there is always a way. But sometimes in this suffering and hopeless despair, my heart cries for shelter to know someone's there. But a voice rises within me saying, hold on, my child. I'll give you strength. I'll give you hope. Just stay a little while. I believe in the sun even when it's not shining, and I believe in love even when there's no one there, but I believe in God even when he is silent. I believe through any trial there is always a way. And, if that is true, that a Jewish prisoner was able to write that, surely I can say the same thing. I think being able to submit and surrender to God is huge in your life. And knowing, if you believe in the sovereignty of God, that this is the path that he has you on, just submitting and surrendering to that. Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Genesis 50:20 says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. And I think that plays big in the life of a family member of an addict. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And I think Romans 5:1-5 is really good also. Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have obtained our introduction by faith into this grace in which we stand. And we exult in hope of the glory of God. And not only this, but we also exult in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance, and perseverance, proven character, and proven character, hope. And hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit,